There are places on this planet where the Earth has not yet decided what it wants to be. Where fire and ice share the same ground without apology. Where the land beneath your feet is being made and unmade at the same time. Iceland is one of those places. And most people who visit never fully grasp what they are actually standing on. They come for the northern lights. They come for the geysers and the waterfalls and the vast silence of the interior. And those things are real, but beneath all of it, something far more restless is at work. Iceland is not simply a destination. It is an argument between two of the Earth's most fundamental forces. And that argument has been shaping everything here. The landscape, the culture, the people, and the future of the island itself for millions of years. To understand Iceland, you first have to understand what it actually is. Because Iceland should not exist, not here, not like this. Iceland sits on the mid-Atlantic ridge. The boundary between the North American and Eurasian tectonic plates. These two plates are pulling apart from each other at a rate of roughly 2.5 centimeters per year. About 1 inch. It doesn't sound like much. But over millions of years, that slow separation has created a rift in the ocean floor. And through that rift, magma rises continuously from the Earth's mantle. Most of the mid-Atlantic ridge sits beneath the ocean, invisible and silent. Iceland is the place where it breaks the surface. The island was born from volcanic eruptions on the ocean floor. Gradually building upward until it rose above sea level. It is, in the most literal sense, a piece of the Earth's interior turned inside out. This is not ancient history. Iceland is still being made. New lava fields appear within the same generation that watches them cool. Entire coastlines shift after major eruptions. The island is slightly larger today than it was a century ago. And what makes this place so unusual is that the geological forces responsible are not hidden or remote. They are everywhere, underfoot in the geothermal fields. visible in the fresh black lava that has not yet grown its first coat of moss. Present in the steam that rises from sidewalk vents in the middle of the capital city. The numbers give a sense of scale. Iceland has more than 130 volcanoes, of which around 30 are considered active. It has more than 10,000 waterfalls. Roughly 11% of the island's surface is covered by glaciers, including Vatnajokull, which at around 8,100 square kilometers, roughly 3,100 square miles, is the largest glacier in Europe. And yet, this same island sits on a hotspot so intense that geothermal energy heats nearly 90% of all homes without burning a single drop of fuel. Ice covers a volcano. The volcano heats the ice from below. The ice melts and floods the land in events called jökullaups, glacial outburst floods that can release more water in hours than the Amazon River carries in a day. This is what Iceland is. Not a land of contradictions, but a land where opposing forces have learned to coexist so completely that the contradiction has become the identity. And understanding this makes every place you are about to see mean something different. Because when we move through Iceland's most remarkable locations, the steam and the silence and the sudden violence of the landscape won't feel random anymore. They'll feel like pieces of something much older and much larger than any single human story. Most capital cities announce themselves slowly. Suburbs spread outward, traffic thickens. The urban density builds in layers until the center reveals itself. Reykjavik does none of this. You arrive almost without warning into a city of around 230,000 people, which accounts for more than 2/3 of Iceland's entire population. Sitting directly beside the ocean on a peninsula of volcanic rock, with snow-capped mountains visible from nearly every street. The city's name means Smoky Bay in Old Norse. A name given by the first Norse settler, Ingolfur Arnarsson, who arrived in 874 AD. and interpreted the steam rising from geothermal vents in the ground as smoke. He was the first permanent settler. Iceland had been entirely uninhabited before the Norse arrived, which makes it one of the last large landmasses on Earth to be settled by humans. That founding story matters because it set the tone for everything that followed. Iceland was not conquered or colonized in the traditional sense. It was settled by people who came looking for land and found a place that offered both extraordinary resources and extraordinary demands. The same geothermal energy that now heats homes and powers greenhouses was, in those early centuries, a source of sulfur fumes. Unstable ground, and the constant reminder that the earth beneath was alive. Reykjavik today carries that duality quietly. The Hallgrímskirkja Church rises 74.5 meters above the city. Its concrete facade designed to resemble the basalt lava columns that form naturally across Iceland's landscape. It is one of the most recognizable buildings in the country. But what makes it interesting is not its size. It is the fact that its architectural language was drawn directly from geology. The building looks like it grew from the rock rather than being built on top of it. Just outside the city, the Reykjanes Peninsula offers something visitors rarely expect so close to an urban center. This peninsula sits directly on the mid-Atlantic ridge, and the landscape shows it. Lava fields stretch in every direction, some only decades old. Geothermal pools steam at the surface. In 2021, and again in subsequent years, fissure eruptions opened in the Fagradalsfjall area, just 40 kilometers from the capital, with lava flowing openly for months, while residents watched from nearby hillsides. That proximity between modern civilization and active volcanism is not unique to Iceland. But nowhere else does it feel quite so ordinary. People drove to watch the eruption. Hikers reached it within an hour from the city. The lava cooled and the roads reopened, and life continued as it always has here. Adapted around the fire rather than retreating from it. There is a route that loops through southwestern Iceland, covering roughly 300 kilometers. About 185 miles, passing through 3 locations that together explain more about how this island works than any single place could manage alone. It is called the Golden Circle, and while it draws more tourists than any other route in Iceland, the reason is not marketing. It is geology made visible in a way that is almost impossible to look away from. Thingvellir sits in a wide rift valley where the North American and Eurasian plates meet at the surface. You can walk between the 2 continental plates here, along a path that runs through a fissure in the rock. The ground on one side belongs, geologically, to North America. The ground on the other side belongs to Eurasia, and every year, the gap between them widens by that same slow measure. 2.5 centimeters, the width of a thumb. But Thingvellir is not only a geological site. It is also where Iceland's parliament, the Althing, was established in 930 AD. Making it one of the oldest parliamentary assemblies in the world. For centuries, the natural amphitheater of the Rift Valley served as the meeting place where Icelandic chieftains gathered to debate laws and settle disputes. The landscape itself became the architecture of democracy. Cliffs of basalt form the walls. The flat valley floor became the assembly ground. And the same geological forces that created the space continued their slow work through every session that was ever held there. The Geyser geothermal field gives the English language one of its most universal words. The Great Geyser, which lends its name to all geysers everywhere, has been erupting intermittently for thousands of years, though it is now largely dormant. But its neighbor Strákur erupts with reliable precision every 5 to 10 minutes. Sending a column of boiling water between 15 and 40 meters into the air. Roughly 50 to 130 feet before collapsing and gathering pressure again. What makes Strákur interesting is the mechanism. A channel of water sits above a magma-heated rock formation. Pressure builds as the water heats beyond normal boiling point. Kept liquid by the weight of the water column above it. Then, when a small disturbance triggers the release, the entire column flashes to steam and erupts upward. It is a pressure system, not unlike a living thing, and it runs without any human intervention. Powered entirely by the same heat that has been accumulating beneath this ground for millions of years. Gullfoss completes the circle. This waterfall drops in 2 stages into a canyon that reaches 70 meters deep. Roughly 230 feet. The water comes from the Vatnajokull glacier, carried by the Vita River. Falling over ancient basalt layers that were laid down by prehistoric eruptions. During peak flow in summer, Gullfoss carries around 140 cubic meters of water per second. There is a story attached to Gullfoss that defines something about Iceland's relationship with its own landscape. In the early 20th century, a foreign investor sought to purchase the waterfall to harness it for hydroelectric power. A local farmer's daughter named Sigridur Tómasdóttir walked to Reykjavik on foot, roughly 120 kilometers. Multiple times to protest the sale. She threatened to throw herself into the falls if the deal went through. The deal eventually collapsed. Gullfoss remained unaltered, and today a small plaque at the waterfall remembers her name. Not because she won through drama, but because she refused to accept that the land could simply be taken and transformed by whoever had the funds to do so. The south coast of Iceland stretches along the base of the island, where the interior highlands meet the Atlantic Ocean. It is one of the most visually dramatic coastlines in the world. Not because of tropical color or calm warmth, but because of the contrast it presents at every turn. Black sand beaches beside white glaciers. Green, mossy hillsides ending abruptly in cliffs of dark basalt. Waterfalls dropping directly from the edges of highland plateaus with no warning, as if the land simply decides to end at that point. Seljalandsfoss is one of the first landmarks you encounter, traveling east from Reykjavik along the southern ring road. This waterfall drops 60 meters, around 200 feet. From a highland plateau above. What makes it unusual is the cave that erosion has carved behind the curtain of water. A path leads around and behind the falls, and for a few months of the year, when the ground is not iced over, you can walk through that passage. Seeing daylight filtered through falling water, the entire world reduced to sound and spray and light. It is a simple geological accident that produces something close to the feeling of stepping inside a natural chamber that was never meant for human visitors. A short distance further east, Skogafoss drops with more force. At 25 meters wide and 60 meters tall, roughly 80 feet wide and 200 feet high, it produces a constant mist that feeds a permanent rainbow on sunny days. Local legend holds that the first Viking settler of this region buried a treasure chest behind the falls. The chest was supposedly discovered once, centuries later. But only the ring on its lid could be grasped before it slipped away. The ring is said to be preserved in a local museum, though the treasure has never been found. Iceland is full of these intersections between verifiable geology and unverifiable legend. And both have shaped the culture with equal force. Reynisfjara is where the south coast reveals its darker character. This black sand beach near the village of Vik is composed entirely of basalt, ground to fine grain by thousands of years of wave action. The sand is black. The cliffs behind the beach are black. The sea stacks rising from the water just offshore are black columns of basalt called the Reynisdrangar. Which in Icelandic legend are trolls turned to stone by the sunrise while dragging a ship ashore. The waves here are classified as sneaker waves. Unpredictable surges that arrive without the warning signs of standard surf. Signs at the beach warn visitors not to turn their backs on the ocean. And the warnings are serious. The sea does not negotiate with the shoreline. and it does not negotiate with people who underestimate it. But the most significant feature of the south coast is not a waterfall or a beach. It is Vatnajokull. This glacier covers roughly 8% of Iceland's entire surface. Its ice reaches depths of more than 900 meters in places, nearly 3,000 feet. And beneath it, several active volcanoes continue their slow work, including Grímsvötn, which erupts on average every 5 to 10 years. When Grímsvötn erupts under the ice, the meltwater accumulates in a subglacial lake, until the pressure builds enough to break through the glacier edge in a Jökullhlaup. The 1996 Jökullhlaup from Vatnajokull released an estimated 45,000 cubic meters of water per second at its peak. It destroyed 2 major bridges and deposited boulders the size of houses across the outwash plain south of the glacier. The plain is called Skeiðarársandur, a flat expanse of black volcanic sand stretching to the coast. Shaped entirely by these periodic floods. Twisted steel girders from the destroyed bridges have been left in place near the road as a monument. Not to destruction, but to the forces that operate here on a scale that human infrastructure was never built to match. At the southeastern edge of Vatnajokull, a lagoon has formed that did not exist a century ago. Jökulsárlón was created entirely by glacial retreat. As the Breiðamerkurjökull glacier pulled back from the coastline during the 20th century, a body of water opened between the ice and the sea. Today the lagoon covers around 20 square kilometers, nearly 8 square miles, and reaches depths of over 250 meters, about 820 feet. Making it the deepest lake in Iceland. Icebergs calve from the glacier face and drift slowly across the lagoon. Some the size of houses, others the size of cars, all in shades of blue and white and occasionally black from the volcanic ash layers embedded in the ice itself. The lagoon connects to the ocean through a narrow channel, and tidal currents carry some of the smaller bergs out to sea. And then deposit them back on the black sand beach just outside the channel. The result is Diamond Beach, where translucent blocks of glacial ice sit scattered across black volcanic sand. Lit by whatever light the Icelandic sky is offering that hour. What makes Jökulsárlón complicated is that its beauty is inseparable from loss. This lagoon exists because a glacier that has been here for thousands of years is retreating. The ice drifting through the water represents the glacier's past, frozen centuries ago. Now melting in a warmer present, scientists measure the rate of retreat regularly. The glacier has lost roughly 1.5 kilometers of length per year in recent decades. The lagoon is growing, the ice is diminishing, and both of these facts are visible in the same glance. Seabirds wheel over the water. Arctic terns, the same species that migrates annually from the Arctic to the Antarctic and back again. The longest migration of any animal on Earth, nests near the lagoon's edge during summer. Seals have established a permanent presence in the lagoon and on the surrounding shores. Drawn by the cold, clear water and the fish that follow glacial meltwater. They move between ice flows with a fluency that makes the water look like home, in a way it simply does not look for anything else. Most visitors to Iceland trace the ring road, the highway that circles the island, and consider the country explored. What this misses is the Westfjords, a peninsula in the northwest that accounts for roughly 1/4 of Iceland's total coastline. But is visited by a small fraction of the people who come to the island. The reason is access. The Westfjords are connected to the main island by a narrow isthmus, and the roads within are slow, winding, and frequently closed by weather. This is the oldest part of Iceland. The rock here is around 16 million years old. Significantly older than the active volcanic zones in the south and center. The landscape has had time to settle into something the rest of Iceland has not yet reached. The fjords cut deep into the peninsula from every direction, creating a coastline of such complexity that the actual distance from one coastal point to another, measured along the shore, can be 10 times the straight line distance between them. Dinjandi is the waterfall that defines this region. It falls in a series of 7 cascades over a total height of around 100 meters, roughly 330 feet. The uppermost tier spreading 30 meters wide at its base like a tiered curtain of white water against dark basalt. It sits at the end of a fjord where the mountains rise directly from the water. There are no crowds here. There is rarely anyone at all. The silence between the sound of the water and the next sound of the water is the kind of silence that cities spend billions of dollars trying to recreate and never quite manage. The Westfjords are also where the Arctic fox makes its stronghold. This is the only land mammal native to Iceland, present on the island since before humans arrived. Iceland's Arctic fox population is centered in the Westfjords, particularly around the Hornstrandir Nature Reserve at the peninsula's northern tip. Where no permanent human settlement has existed since the mid-20th century, the foxes here have had enough generations without hunting pressure to lose their wariness of humans. And they approach with a curiosity that feels, in that landscape, like recognition. Hornstrandir can only be reached by boat in summer. It has no roads, no permanent buildings, no services. The coastline is shaped by cliffs that rise over 500 meters from the sea. Seabird colonies on these cliffs number in the millions during breeding season. Razorbills, guillemots, kittiwakes, and puffins occupy different vertical zones on the same cliff face. Each species selecting its preferred altitude with the precision of a system refined over thousands of generations. Iceland is home to around 60% of the world's Atlantic puffin population, roughly 8 to 10 million birds. They come to Iceland in spring, breed in burrows in grassy cliff-top soil, and return to sea in late summer. Spending the rest of the year on the open ocean. During breeding season, they fly with a wing beat speed of around 400 beats per minute. Carrying small fish crosswise in their distinctive bills, navigating back to the same burrow they used the previous year, with an accuracy that still puzzles researchers who have studied their navigation for decades. And one of the clearest examples of this ancient predictability is something we will see further into this journey. Iceland's interior is called the highlands, and for most of the year it is impassable. Roads that cross the interior, called F-roads, are only open during the brief summer window. And even then they require four-wheel drive vehicles capable of crossing rivers that have no bridges. The interior is not promoted heavily to visitors because it is genuinely difficult, and the difficulty is not incidental, but fundamental. This is not a managed wilderness. It is the actual interior of an active volcanic island. Landmannalaugar sits at the edge of the highlands, reached by crossing several river fords and a landscape of fresh lava fields. From an eruption that occurred around 1477 AD. The lava here is still recognizable as lava, jagged and broken, with almost no vegetation. It is geological adolescence, a surface that has not yet learned to be soil. But beyond the lava field, something unexpected appears. The Fjallabak Nature Reserve is a landscape of colored rhyolite mountains. Volcanic rock in shades of pink, red, yellow, green, purple, and brown. Produced by the interaction of different minerals under different cooling conditions and subsequent hydrothermal alteration. These are not painted hills. They are the actual color of the rock. And from a distance, the effect is so unlikely that the first-time visitor tends to stop moving and simply look. Not quite believing that the pigment is geological rather than artistic. Hot springs emerge naturally at Landmannalaugar, forming warm pools where the water reaches comfortable bathing temperatures. Through geothermal heating, the sight of steam rising from these pools against a backdrop of colored mountains and snowfields in the near distance completes the sense that this place exists slightly outside the rules that govern the rest of the planet's surface. The Laugavegur trek begins here and runs for roughly 55 kilometers, about 34 miles, to the village of Thorsmork. It is considered one of the great long-distance hiking routes in the world. Along the way, it crosses volcanic desert, glacial rivers, obsidian fields, and geothermal areas where the ground is warm to the touch. It takes most hikers 4 to 5 days, and for those 4 to 5 days, the route passes through terrain that has no equivalent anywhere else on Earth. And as the highlands give way to the north, the landscape shifts again toward open water, ancient lava, and the long blue light of Arctic summer. Northern Iceland has a different character from the south. The landscape is drier, in places almost steppe-like. The coastline opens into wide bays rather than the dramatic fjords of the west. The towns are smaller and more spread out, and the relationship with light is unlike anywhere else in the country. Akureyri is the largest town in northern Iceland, with a population of around 20,000. Making it Iceland's second city, despite a size that most countries would classify as a small town. It sits at the end of Eyjafjordur, a long, narrow fjord that drives deep into the highlands. Located just south of the Arctic Circle, in June, the sun does not set here. It dips toward the horizon and then rises again without crossing below it, casting the same low golden light on the town and the fjord at 2 a.m. that it casts at 2 p.m. Húsavík, an hour east of Akureyri, has become one of the world's most significant whale-watching destinations. the cold, nutrient-rich waters of Skjaldfandi Bay create conditions that attract feeding aggregations of humpback whales through the summer months. Humpbacks here display the full repertoire of behaviors that have made them the most observed large whale in the world. Breaching, lunge feeding, tail slapping, and the extended singing of males that carries for hundreds of kilometers through the water column. But the whale watching here carries something beyond spectacle. Húsavík's Whale Museum is one of the most scientifically serious natural history institutions dedicated to cetaceans anywhere in the world. Individual humpbacks have been photographed and cataloged here for decades, recognized by the unique patterns on the underside of their flukes, the way humans are recognized by fingerprints. Some of these animals are known to local researchers by name. Their histories, their traveling companions, their calf records, documented year by year. In this bay, the whales are not anonymous. Lake Mývatn lies in the shadow of active volcanoes in northeastern Iceland. Its name means Midge Lake, a reference to the dense clouds of midges that hatch from the shallow water in summer. The midges are not biting. They are the base of a food chain that supports one of the most diverse duck populations in Europe. With around 15 breeding species on the lake. The volcanic landscape around Mývatn includes pseudo-craters formed when lava flowed over wetlands. And the moisture beneath exploded upward, leaving rounded cones that look like eruption vents. But are in fact the scars of steam explosions from deep beneath the surface. Just north of Mývatn, the Krafla volcanic system has erupted repeatedly in historical times. The most recent series of eruptions, called the Krafla Fires, ran from 1975 to 1984. A geothermal power plant operates directly within this active volcanic zone. Extracting energy from the same heat that periodically breaks through the surface. The relationship between the power infrastructure and the active geology is not comfortable. It is pragmatic. Iceland has learned to use what it has. Deep in Iceland's interior, accessible only in summer and only with serious preparation, the Askja caldera sits within the Dyngjufjöll mountain system. This is one of the most remote and geologically significant places in Iceland. The The caldera was formed by a massive eruption in 1875 that sent ash as far as Scandinavia and prompted a wave of Icelandic emigration to North America. Within the caldera sits the Vatnajokull crater lake, which formed when a smaller eruption created a depression that filled with water. The lake reaches depths of 220 meters, around 720 feet. And its surface sits at 1,059 meters above sea level. The water is cold and acidic. The surrounding landscape is black ash and shattered rock. With almost nothing growing, it looks to most visitors exactly like what astronauts describe seeing on the moon. This comparison is not figurative. NASA used the Askja region to train Apollo astronauts in the late 1960s. Because the volcanic desert most closely resembled the lunar surface of anywhere accessible on Earth. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walked this landscape before they walked the moon. Learning to observe geological features under conditions that approximated the strangeness of what they were about to encounter. Iceland prepared humans for the moon. And the landscape has not changed significantly since. Nearby, the Holaron lava field was created by the Bardarbunga eruption of 2014 and 2015. The largest lava eruption in Iceland in more than 200 years. It produced more than 1.4 cubic kilometers of lava. Covering an area of around 84 square kilometers. Roughly 32 square miles. The eruption lasted 6 months, and during that time, it released more sulfur dioxide per day than all of the industrial activity in Europe combined. The atmosphere over Iceland was measured, the numbers were real, and leaving this blackened plain behind, the journey moves toward the sky itself. Between September and March, when the skies over Iceland are clear and the solar wind is active, the aurora borealis appears. Most photographs of the northern lights suggest something static. A frozen arch of color across a night sky. In reality, the aurora moves. It pulses and shifts and occasionally erupts into curtains of light that sweep across the entire visible sky in seconds. folding and unfurling in greens, whites, occasional purples and reds. According to the intensity of the solar particles colliding with the atmosphere 100 kilometers above. The science is precise, the experience is not. There are people who have watched the Northern Lights dozens of times and still describe the sensation of genuine disorientation. Not fear, but the particular vertigo that comes from having no framework adequate to what you are looking at. The sky moves. The light has structure but not form. And below it, Iceland's volcanic landscape, in winter reduced to dark silhouette and silence, provides an anchor only in the sense that it is solid. Everything above it seems to belong to a different version of physics. The Reykjanes Peninsula on Iceland's west coast offers some of the most dramatic northern lights viewing, because its position extends into the Atlantic. And its weather patterns can clear faster than the interior. At the tip of the peninsula stands the Vatnajokull volcano, capped by a glacier that reaches 1,446 meters. Nearly 4,745 feet. Jules Verne chose this specific volcano as the entrance to the center of the Earth in his 1864 novel. And Icelanders have never entirely forgotten that choice. The mountain carries that fictional legacy alongside its geological one. Both have shaped how it is understood. Iceland today has a population of around 370,000 people. It is one of the most literate nations on Earth, publishing more books per capita than any other country. It runs on geothermal and hydroelectric energy almost entirely. It has no standing army. It ranks consistently among the top 5 countries in global indices of peace. Gender equality and quality of life. None of this happened by accident. It happened because of what the land demanded. A population that settled an island of fire and ice had to develop trust and cooperation at a community level that larger societies could afford to defer. If your neighbor's farm failed in winter, your neighbor would die. If the volcano that sat above your valley erupted, you would need every able person available to respond. The Icelandic saga tradition, those medieval narratives of family feuds and political struggles and difficult decisions, reflects a society intensely aware that every individual choice had community consequences in a place where the margin for error was thin. The 2010 eruption of Vatnajokull disrupted air travel across Europe for 6 days and produced an ash cloud that affected hundreds of thousands of flights. In Iceland itself, farms near the volcano were buried under ash. Rivers flooded. Livestock had to be moved in the middle of the night. Local farmers and emergency services coordinated the response with an efficiency that came not from recent training, but from a cultural inheritance of knowing what to do when the earth decides to change its terms. The Icelandic relationship with the landscape is not romantic. It is practical and deep and based on several hundred years of specific costly lessons. The names given to every valley, every hill, every geological feature reflect this. Iceland is one of the most thoroughly named landscapes on Earth. Every feature known and recorded, not as an abstraction, but as a piece of ground that someone once had to understand in order to survive it. There are places that exist as destinations, and there are places that exist as arguments. Iceland is an argument that has been running for millions of years between the forces that build the world and the forces that wear it down, between fire and ice, between the deep interior of the planet and the cold surface of the Atlantic. Between the ancient and the continuously newborn, every glacier that calves into a lagoon, every geyser that erupts on schedule, every lava field that has not yet grown its first moss, every puffin returning to the same burrow, every farmhouse built over a geothermal vent, every aurora that moves through a winter sky, above a volcano that may or may not wake again tomorrow is a piece of that argument. And what makes Iceland extraordinary is that the argument has no resolution in sight. The island is being made while it is being lived on. That is what no photograph and no list of facts fully captures. The ground you stand on in Iceland is not finished. It is in process. and the people who built a civilization on it understood something that most of the world has had the luxury of forgetting. That the Earth is not a stable platform beneath human ambition. It is a living system that continues its own work regardless of what is built on top of it. Iceland does not ask to be admired, it asks to be understood. And the closer you look, the more there is to see. You have stood on the boundary where continents pull apart and fire meets ice. Now, see what happens when an entire civilization is built at the top of the world. Click now to explore Greenland, the island that swallowed its own history.